On the evening of September 16, 1944, the air above southern England carries the familiar sound of engines returning from occupied Europe. The daylight is fading, and long shadows stretch across the airfields, where ground crews wait beside rows of weathered bombers. Damp autumn air clings to uniforms already stained with oil and dust. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another raid has ended. Yet inside a handful of guarded buildings, hidden from the noise of aircraft and the routine rhythm of war, another battle is unfolding in almost complete silence. There are no explosions here, no advancing armies, and no headlines. Instead, there are blackboards crowded with equations, precision instruments humming behind locked doors, and scientists working beneath layers of secrecy so strict that even many senior military officers know almost nothing about what is taking place. Britain has been at war for 5 years. Much of Europe remains under German occupation. London still bears the scars of the Blitz, while across the Channel the Third Reich continues to resist despite mounting pressure from east and west. Allied armies have landed in Normandy, Paris has been liberated, and Germany's borders are beginning to feel the weight of an invasion that can no longer be delayed. Yet victory remains uncertain. Adolf Hitler still commands millions of soldiers. German factories continue producing tanks, aircraft, rockets, and submarines, despite relentless bombing. Even as Allied forces advance, new weapons emerge from Germany's laboratories, raising fears that science itself may prolong the conflict. Among British intelligence officers, another anxiety has taken hold. What if Germany reaches an unimaginable scientific breakthrough first? Reports arriving from occupied Europe suggest that German physicists are investigating the mysterious power hidden inside the atom. Exact details remain uncertain, but even fragmentary intelligence is enough to alarm officials in London. A weapon based upon nuclear fission would not merely change the battlefield. It could change civilization itself. Behind heavily guarded doors, Britain has already begun its own response. Years earlier, a secret research program had quietly assembled some of the finest scientific minds in Europe, many of them refugees who had escaped persecution under Nazi rule. Their work is known by an intentionally ordinary codename, tube alloys. The title reveals nothing of its true purpose. To outsiders, it appears to be another bureaucratic project among thousands created during wartime. In reality, it represents one of the most closely guarded scientific efforts in British history. The extraordinary secrecy surrounding tube alloys is deliberate. Every letter is censored. Every laboratory is protected. Research is divided so that few participants understand the entire program. Even ministers receive only limited briefings. According to wartime records, protecting knowledge becomes almost as important as discovering it. Britain understands that if information leaks to Germany, the consequences could be catastrophic. Historians continue to debate exactly how much Hitler himself understood about the Allied atomic program. There is no surviving evidence confirming that he possessed detailed knowledge of tube alloys, nor that he believed this specific British project alone would end Germany. What is well documented, however, is that Nazi leaders feared the industrial and scientific strength of Britain and its allies. German intelligence repeatedly sought information about Allied research, while Hitler demanded increasingly ambitious technological programs of his own, convinced that revolutionary weapons could still reverse Germany's fortunes. In that autumn of 1944, the scientists inside Britain's secure laboratories cannot know how history will remember their work. They are not chasing fame, nor even victory in the conventional sense. They are racing against time, against uncertainty, and against the possibility that somewhere inside the collapsing Reich, another group of scientists may be solving the same terrifying problem first. Hidden from public view, their calculations, experiments, and relentless determination are quietly shaping a struggle that stretches far beyond the battlefields of Europe. Few outside those guarded rooms realize it, but the outcome of their secret work may influence the future of the war and the world in ways almost impossible to imagine. By the time tube alloys gathers momentum, Britain has already learned one painful lesson after another about the limits of conventional warfare. The rapid German victories of 1939 and 1940 have demonstrated that industrial strength alone cannot guarantee survival. France has fallen in a matter of weeks. Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands have been overrun. During the Battle of Britain, the Royal Air Force prevents invasion, but only after months of relentless combat that pushes pilots, aircraft, and factories to their limits. Even victory leaves Britain isolated, standing almost alone in Western Europe while the Third Reich controls vast territories and resources. At sea, German U-boats threaten to cut Britain's supply lines across the Atlantic. In the skies, the Luftwaffe has shown how modern technology can magnify military power. By 1941, the conflict is no longer simply a contest of armies. It has become a race between laboratories, factories, and research establishments. Radar, code-breaking, jet propulsion, and long-range rockets are transforming warfare almost as quickly as generals can adapt their tactics. Every scientific breakthrough carries the potential to save thousands of lives or cost them. Among physicists, another revolution has been unfolding quietly since the late 1930s. In December 1938, German chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann experimentally identify the process that leads to nuclear fission, while the correct theoretical explanation is provided shortly afterwards by Lise Meitner and her nephew Otto Robert Frisch. Their work reveals that splitting the nucleus of uranium can release an astonishing amount of energy. What appears microscopic could, under the right conditions, unleash power beyond anything previously achieved through chemistry or explosives. At first, the discovery is primarily scientific. Within months, however, its military implications become impossible to ignore. Britain is uniquely positioned to recognize the danger. Many of Europe's leading Jewish and anti-Nazi scientists have sought refuge there after fleeing persecution under Hitler's regime. They bring not only expertise, but also a profound understanding of what a Nazi victory might mean. Among them are physicists who fear that Germany, possessing distinguished scientific institutions and access to uranium resources, could be the first nation to exploit nuclear fission for military purposes. In 1940, two refugee physicists working in Britain, Otto Frisch and Rudolf Peierls, produce what becomes known as the Frisch-Peierls Memorandum. Rather than requiring enormous quantities of uranium, as many scientists had assumed, their calculations suggest that a comparatively small amount of the rare isotope uranium-235 might be sufficient for an explosive device of unprecedented destructive power. Records indicate that this memorandum transforms official thinking almost overnight. What had seemed an unlikely scientific curiosity suddenly appears technically feasible. The British government responds by establishing the Maud Committee, bringing together some of the country's leading scientists to examine whether such a weapon can genuinely be built. Over many months, experiments, calculations, and engineering studies are conducted under extraordinary secrecy. The committee's final conclusions are sobering. According to its reports, an atomic bomb is not merely possible. With sufficient industrial effort, it could potentially be produced within a few years. The obstacle is no longer scientific theory, but engineering on a colossal scale. Those findings alter strategic priorities at the highest levels of government. Britain is already manufacturing thousands of aircraft, tanks, and ships while fighting across multiple continents. Diverting skilled scientists, scarce materials, and industrial capacity towards an invisible project appears almost reckless. Yet the alternative seems even more dangerous. If Nazi Germany succeeds first, no existing air defense, fortification, or fleet could reliably protect Britain from such a weapon. Even so, uncertainty remains. Historians continue to debate how advanced the German nuclear program truly was during these years. Wartime intelligence often overestimated German progress, partly because so little reliable information escaped the Reich. Allied planners could not afford to gamble on optimistic assumptions. They had to prepare for the worst case rather than the most comforting one. Thus, Tube Alloys is born not from confidence, but from fear. Fear rooted in scientific possibility rather than confirmed intelligence. Britain is embarking upon one of the most ambitious research programs in its history, without knowing whether its greatest rival is years behind, months ahead, or pursuing an entirely different path. That uncertainty becomes the project's greatest enemy, driving every calculation, every experiment, and every decision as the race for the atom gathers pace. The challenge confronting the scientists of Tube Alloys is unlike anything Britain has attempted before. Building an atomic weapon is not simply a matter of designing a larger bomb. It requires mastering processes that occur inside the nucleus of an atom, a world so small that billions of atoms could fit on the head of a pin. Turning that invisible science into an engineered device demands a combination of theoretical physics, chemistry, metallurgy, precision engineering, and industrial production on a scale that few nations could even contemplate during wartime. The program grows from the recommendations of the MAUD Committee, but its success depends upon the efforts of dozens of scientists, engineers, and civil servants working across several secure locations. Among the most influential figures is Wallace Akers, appointed to oversee the Tube Alloys Directorate. With experience in both science and industry, Akers is tasked with transforming laboratory research into a practical national project while maintaining extraordinary levels of secrecy. Scientific leadership comes from distinguished researchers including James Chadwick, whose discovery of the neutron in 1932 had already reshaped modern physics and later earned him the Nobel Prize. Chadwick understands that the neutron is the key to sustaining a nuclear chain reaction. His calculations, together with those of colleagues such as Mark Oliphant, John Cockcroft, and numerous refugee scientists from continental Europe, help convert theoretical possibility into practical engineering plans. The central obstacle lies in uranium itself. Natural uranium consists predominantly of uranium-238, while the much rarer uranium-235 makes up less than 1% of the material. Separating these two isotopes is extraordinarily difficult because they are chemically identical. Imagine trying to separate identical grains of sand, where one grain weighs only fractionally less than the next. Ordinary chemical techniques cannot distinguish them. Instead, engineers must rely on tiny differences in mass, demanding machines of exceptional precision operating continuously for months. Several methods are investigated. One involves gaseous diffusion, forcing uranium hexafluoride gas through microscopic barriers thousands of times until the lighter uranium-235 becomes gradually concentrated. Another explores electromagnetic separation, in which electrically charged uranium ions are bent by powerful magnetic fields, allowing slightly lighter particles to follow marginally different paths. Both approaches consume enormous quantities of electricity, specialized materials, and skilled labor. According to wartime reports, no country has ever attempted industrial processes of this complexity while simultaneously fighting a global war. At the same time, researchers investigate an alternative route involving plutonium, an artificial element produced inside nuclear reactors. This requires constructing reactors capable of maintaining a controlled chain reaction while safely extracting newly formed plutonium from irradiated fuel. Although Britain contributes important theoretical work, the industrial demands soon become obvious. Exact production figures remain uncertain because many wartime records remained classified for decades, but it becomes increasingly clear that Britain alone lacks the resources to construct every facility needed while sustaining its wider war effort. These realities lead to one of the most significant scientific partnerships of the 20th century. In 1943, following the Quebec Agreement, Britain and the United States formally combined much of their atomic research. Tube alloys does not disappear. Instead, many of its leading scientists become integral members of the American-led Manhattan Project. James Chadwick heads the British mission, while dozens of British and Commonwealth scientists travel across the Atlantic to laboratories including Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, and Chicago. Their expertise, particularly the earlier MAUD findings, helps accelerate work already underway in the United States. For Adolf Hitler and the Nazi leadership, however, the true scale of this Anglo-American cooperation remains hidden. German intelligence gathers fragments of information about Allied scientific activity, but fails to uncover the full extent of the program. Historians generally agree that the German atomic project remains fragmented, divided among competing organizations with limited resources and differing priorities. There is no surviving evidence that Hitler ever grasped how closely British scientific innovation had become intertwined with American industrial capacity. The irony is profound. Tube alloys begins as a distinctly British response to a feared German breakthrough, yet its greatest achievement lies in convincing Allied leaders that victory will require unprecedented international cooperation. The project's laboratories are scattered across Britain, its ideas cross the Atlantic in sealed diplomatic bags, and its scientists carry knowledge that cannot be measured in tons or counted on production lines. By the time the collaboration reaches full strength, the race is no longer between isolated nations. It has become a contest between entire scientific civilizations, each striving to unlock the same extraordinary force before the other. As the war enters its final year in Europe, the influence of tube alloys is no longer confined to laboratories and committee rooms. Its most important contribution now travels with the British scientists who have joined the wider Allied atomic effort. Working alongside American and Canadian colleagues, they become part of a program spread across vast industrial complexes and remote research centers, each separated by thousands of kilometers, yet linked by a single objective. Security remains absolute. Many workers know only the small task assigned to them. According to wartime records, entire facilities operate without most employees understanding the true purpose of their labor. In Britain, intelligence officers continue monitoring Germany's scientific progress with growing urgency. Reports from occupied Europe are examined for any indication that the Reich has made a breakthrough in nuclear research. Some information comes from resistance networks, some from intercepted communications, and some from interrogations of captured personnel. Much of it is incomplete or contradictory. Historians continue to debate how accurately Allied intelligence assessed the German nuclear program during the war. At the time, however, uncertainty itself is treated as a threat. The Allied advance across Western Europe during 1944 provides an unexpected opportunity to answer those questions directly. As German forces retreat following the Normandy landings, specialized intelligence teams begin searching universities, laboratories, and industrial sites associated with nuclear research. This effort becomes known as Operation Alsos. Its purpose is not merely to capture documents, but to determine whether Germany is close to producing an atomic weapon. The investigation leads Allied personnel through cities including Strasbourg, Heidelberg, and eventually into southern Germany. Laboratories are inspected, scientific papers collected, and leading German physicists located before they can disappear into the chaos of the collapsing Reich. Among those eventually detained are prominent researchers including Werner Heisenberg, whose role in Germany's uranium project has long been the subject of historical debate. The discoveries surprise many Allied planners. Documents and equipment indicate that German nuclear research has progressed far more slowly than feared. The program has produced valuable scientific knowledge, but has not overcome the immense engineering challenges required to build an atomic bomb. Limited industrial investment, shortages of critical materials, competing military priorities, and organizational fragmentation have all constrained its progress. Exact reasons remain debated by historians, But there is broad agreement that Germany never came close to producing a usable nuclear weapon before the end of the war. If you're enjoying this journey through history, subscribing genuinely helps us continue bringing remarkable true stories like this to the channel. The significance of those findings extends well beyond intelligence reports. For years, Britain had invested scarce scientific talent and precious resources into tube alloys because it could not afford to assume Germany would fail. The project was driven by caution rather than certainty. Had Allied leaders underestimated German capabilities, the consequences might have been irreversible. Instead, their willingness to prepare for the worst ensured they were never forced to respond to a nuclear-armed Third Reich. For the scientists involved, the emotional atmosphere is complex. Many are refugees who fled Nazi persecution only a few years earlier. Others have watched Europe descend into devastation while applying their expertise to a weapon whose destructive potential they fully understand. They celebrate Germany's inability to complete such a device, yet many also recognize that the knowledge they have helped develop cannot be contained forever. The scientific race that began with fear of Hitler is already becoming something larger, one that will shape the uneasy peace that follows victory as profoundly as it shaped the war itself. The achievements of tube alloys become even clearer when compared with the parallel efforts undertaken by the world's major powers. Before the war, Germany possesses some of the finest physicists on Earth and is the birthplace of many breakthroughs in modern atomic science. Yet scientific excellence alone proves insufficient. The German uranium project remains divided between competing institutions, receives inconsistent political support, and never develops the industrial infrastructure required to separate significant quantities of uranium-235 or produce plutonium on the scale necessary for a weapon. According to surviving records, the program employs hundreds of specialists, but it never approaches the enormous industrial commitment made by the Allies. Britain faces a different problem. Its scientists reach crucial conclusions remarkably early. The 1941 Maud Committee reports persuade many experts that an atomic bomb is technically achievable, and historians generally agree that these findings significantly influenced American decision-making. However, Britain simply cannot shoulder the burden alone. By 1943, the country is already committing vast resources to bomber production, naval construction, radar, anti-submarine warfare, and the invasion of occupied Europe. Building the immense enrichment plants needed for nuclear weapons would require electrical power, raw materials, and labor on a scale that stretches beyond Britain's wartime economy. The United States, by contrast, possesses both the scientific talent and the industrial capacity to transform theory into reality. Under the Manhattan Project, enormous facilities rise at Oak Ridge in Tennessee, Hanford in Washington State, and Los Alamos in New Mexico. Collectively, the project eventually employs well over 100,000 people and costs approximately $2 billion in wartime currency. An unprecedented investment in scientific research. Vast gaseous diffusion plants, electromagnetic separation systems, and plutonium-producing reactors operate simultaneously, consuming extraordinary quantities of electricity and specialized materials. Britain contributes critical expertise, while America provides the industrial scale that makes production possible. The Soviet Union follows a different path. During the war, its primary focus remains defeating the German invasion through conventional military means. Soviet atomic research continues, but progress is constrained by the immense demands of the Eastern Front. Only after 1945 does the Soviet program accelerate rapidly, drawing upon its own scientific work, captured German expertise and intelligence gathered about the Manhattan Project. Within 4 years, the Soviet Union successfully tests its first atomic bomb, signaling the beginning of the nuclear age and the Cold War. These contrasting approaches reveal an important truth. Success in nuclear development is determined not by a single brilliant scientist or one revolutionary invention, but by the ability to unite research, engineering, manufacturing, and political commitment into a coordinated national effort. Germany excels in theoretical physics but never achieves the necessary industrial momentum. Britain identifies the scientific solution early, yet recognizes its economic limits. The United States combines scientific collaboration with unmatched manufacturing power, while the Soviet Union demonstrates how quickly determined state mobilization can close the technological gap after the war. Looking back with the benefit of historical evidence, tube alloys stands not as a forgotten curiosity, but as the crucial bridge between British scientific insight and Allied industrial achievement. Its greatest strength is not that it outperformed every rival in isolation, but that it proved cooperation could accomplish what no single nation could realistically achieve alone. The immediate military impact of tube alloys is difficult to measure because its work remains hidden beneath layers of wartime secrecy, yet its wider historical influence is unmistakable. Unlike a tank rolling across a battlefield or a bomber visible in the skies above Europe, the project's achievements are largely invisible at the time they occur. Its greatest success lies in knowledge shared, decisions shaped, and scientific momentum created long before the world learns that the program ever existed. The Maud Committee's conclusions convince British leaders that nuclear weapons are not a distant theoretical possibility, but an engineering challenge that can be overcome with sufficient resources. Historians generally agree that these findings play a significant role in persuading the United States to accelerate its own efforts. In that sense, tube alloys becomes one of the intellectual foundations upon which the Manhattan Project is built. British scientists do not merely contribute calculations, they bring years of research, practical experience, and a level of confidence that the immense undertaking is technically achievable. When Germany surrenders in May 1945, the original fear that inspired tube alloys has passed. Allied investigations reveal that the German atomic program has fallen far short of producing a weapon. Yet the scientific discoveries cannot be reversed. Within months, atomic bombs are used against Hiroshima and Nagasaki, demonstrating a level of destructive power unlike anything previously witnessed. Although Britain does not manufacture those first weapons independently, the contribution of British researchers through tube alloys and the British mission is recognized by historians as an important part of the wider Allied effort that made them possible. The legacy of the project continues well beyond the Second World War. Britain resumes an independent nuclear program after the conflict, eventually establishing the facilities and expertise needed to produce its own atomic weapon. In 1952, Britain successfully conducts Operation Hurricane, becoming the world's third nuclear power. Many of the scientific principles, administrative structures, and professional relationships first developed during tube alloys help shape that post-war program, illustrating how wartime research evolves into long-term national capability. The project also leaves an enduring mark on scientific cooperation. The close partnership forged between British, American, and Canadian researchers demonstrates that complex technological challenges can transcend national boundaries when governments choose collaboration over competition. At the same time, the secrecy surrounding atomic research becomes a defining feature of the early Cold War, as former allies increasingly guard the very knowledge they had once shared. Today, the story of tube alloys survives not through dramatic monuments, but through archives, preserved documents, and museum collections that illuminate the hidden history of Britain's wartime science. Institutions such as the Imperial War Museums and the National Archives preserve records that allow historians to reconstruct how a project concealed behind an ordinary codename became one of the most consequential scientific enterprises of the 20th century. Exact details of some wartime activities remain uncertain because portions of the documentation were classified for many years. and historians continue to debate aspects of intelligence assessments and decision-making. Even so, the surviving evidence leaves little doubt that tube alloys changed the course of Allied scientific strategy. Its true legacy lies not in a single machine or battlefield victory, but in the remarkable demonstration that ideas, protected by secrecy and pursued with determination, could become as decisive in modern warfare as armies themselves. The evening of September 16, 1944, fades into darkness, much as it began. Aircraft continue to return across the English countryside, their engines echoing over fields that have witnessed years of preparation, sacrifice, and uncertainty. Mechanics guide tired crews back to dispersal points beneath dimmed lights, while, beyond the airfields, the windows of anonymous government buildings remain carefully shaded from view. To those passing outside, they appear ordinary. Few would suspect that behind those walls, calculations made with pencils, slide rules, and laboratory instruments are helping to shape the future as profoundly as the bombers crossing the night sky. That is the quiet truth at the heart of tube alloys. It was never designed to capture public imagination. It produced no triumphant wartime posters, inspired no famous marching songs, and revealed no dramatic weapon to the British public. Even many who contributed to the program understood only a small fraction of its purpose. Secrecy was so complete that participants often spent years solving individual technical problems without knowing precisely how their work fitted into the larger picture. The project existed in fragments, connected only by trust, discipline, and an understanding that failure might carry consequences impossible to measure. The title of this story speaks of Hitler believing a forgotten British project could end Germany. The historical record, however, requires a more careful conclusion. There is no surviving evidence that Adolf Hitler possessed detailed knowledge of tube alloys or believed this specific British program alone would destroy the Third Reich. Historians continue to debate exactly what German intelligence understood about Allied nuclear research, but the available evidence suggests that the Nazi leadership never appreciated the full scale of the Anglo-American atomic collaboration developing beyond its reach. What Hitler unquestionably did understand was that the war had become a contest of science as well as soldiers. Throughout the conflict, he demanded revolutionary technologies capable of reversing Germany's fortunes, from jet aircraft and advanced submarines to the V-weapons launched against Britain during the final years of the war. Yet these ambitious programs competed for dwindling resources, fragmented industrial capacity, and increasingly desperate strategic priorities. While Germany searched for technological miracles to rescue a collapsing military position, the Allies gradually demonstrated that cooperation, industrial organization, and sustained scientific investment could prove more decisive than isolated breakthroughs.